Welcome to the Story Times. Hello, I am Max Carter, 38 years old, and I am narrator of this story. So let's get start this story. The room wasn't quiet, it was suffocating. People were still smiling, but their eyes were darting back and forth, unsure if what they just heard was a joke, some elaborate bit I had planned to spice up our anniversary party. But Sophia knew. Her entire body went rigid next to me, the carefully curated mask of charm and poise cracking like cheap porcelain. She opened her mouth, then shut it, opened it again. I could see her brain short-circuiting, scrambling for a way to turn this in her favor. She was good at that, manipulating reality until she came out the innocent victim, the misunderstood wife, the poor woman married to a man who just didn't appreciate her. I let her stand there, drowning in her own silence, before I leaned in slightly and, just loud enough for only her to hear, said, "Go on, Sophia. Tell them I'm wrong." The color drained from her face. That was the moment she understood this wasn't some passive-aggressive jab. This wasn't a drunken slip of the tongue. I had planned this. I had been waiting for this. And now, in front of all her adoring fans, I had just stripped her of control. Sophia let out a breathy, nervous laugh, shaking her head as if I were being ridiculous. "Okay, babe, I don't know what kind of—" I didn't let her finish. "I know, Sophia. 3 words. Just 3. But they slammed into her like a speeding truck. She tried to keep the performance going, her fingers reaching for my arm in a rehearsed display of wifely affection. "Baby, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." Scaring her? That was rich. I pulled back before she could touch me. Her fingers clenched into a fist at her side, nails digging into her palms so hard I almost expected to see blood. "I know," I repeated, louder this time, turning my attention to the guests. A few of them were shifting uncomfortably, sensing the kind of drama they only ever saw in movies unfolding right in front of them. Sophia's best friend, Emily, was standing near the cake, her eyes flicking between the two of us like a cornered animal. Interesting. So at least one of them knew. Sophia's voice was sharper now, more urgent. "This is insane. We're at our anniversary party, and you're—" "Our divorce party," I corrected smoothly. Gasps, actual gasps. Someone in the back coughed. A few people looked downright thrilled, their eyes practically glowing with the promise of fresh gossip. Sophia snapped her gaze around the room, realization dawning on her that she was losing, that she was seconds away from a public downfall so catastrophic that even she wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. Her lips curled into an ugly sneer, the real her bleeding through the polished mask. "You're pathetic," she spat under her breath, voice laced with venom. "What? You think you're the first man to get cheated on? You think this little performance makes you powerful? Please, you're a joke." I didn't flinch, didn't move, just tilted my head and said, "Funny, that's exactly what your boyfriend said about you." Sophia lunged at me, not playfully, not angrily, desperately, because now, she knew, this wasn't just me suspecting something. I had proof, and I wasn't done yet. Sophia's hand didn't make it to my face. Someone, maybe Emily, maybe one of her other fake friends, grabbed her wrist before she could slap me in front of our entire audience. But the damage was already done, not to me, to her. People weren't whispering anymore. They were staring wide-eyed, delighted in that sick way people are when they witness someone else's life collapse like a burning building. Sophia wrenched her arm away from whoever had grabbed her and whirled on me. The mask was gone. The charming, elegant wife who spent years curating the perfect image, that in her place stood the real Sophia, the vindictive, cruel woman I had spent years making excuses for. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she hissed, stepping closer, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You think this little stunt makes you the hero? That people will pity you?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart." I leaned in, close enough that she could feel the heat of my breath. "This isn't about pity. This is about taking back everything you stole from me." Her nostrils flared. "I didn't steal anything from you." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You really believe that, don't you? That you can just rewrite reality however you see fit?" Her jaw clenched. "All right," I said, stepping back and turning to face the crowd again. "You all want the truth?" I lifted my glass, swirling the whiskey inside lazily. "Here it is." Sophia moved fast. Too fast. She lunged again. Not to slap me this time, but to take the microphone from my hand. She wasn't stupid. She knew the second I got the full story out, she'd be finished. But I was faster. I sidestepped her, letting her stumble forward in her heels, catching herself on the edge of the dessert table. More gasps. Someone actually laughed. Sophia's head snapped up, pure hatred in her eyes. 6 months ago, I said, turning my attention back to the guests. Sophia started getting distracted. Long nights at work, last-minute business trips, phone calls she didn't want me overhearing. I let the words settle, watching as the realization spread across their faces like wildfire. I thought maybe she was just stressed, that she needed space, that she was tired. I turned back to Sophia, but she wasn't tired. Were you, sweetheart? Her lips trembled. Shut up. I ignored her. I started noticing little things. Her perfume on shirts that weren't mine. Credit card charges at hotels I'd never been to. A second phone, buried at the bottom of her purse. I let my voice drop, sharp as a blade. And then one night, she came home wearing the wrong wedding ring. Boom. The room erupted. People turned to each other, mouths open, eyes wide, disgusted. Because everyone knew Sophia was a liar. They just never thought she'd be sloppy. Sophia's mouth opened and closed, panic flashing across her face. She wasn't used to this, wasn't used to losing, so she did what she always did. She lied. You're insane. She spat, her voice shaking. This is all in your head. I never cheated on you. You're just... I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. She froze. I turned it to the crowd, pressed play, and let the recording speak for itself. Sophia's voice filled the room. Breathless, giggling, whispering things to a man that no wife should ever say to anyone but her husband. Her words rang out like gunshots. She didn't just say his name. She moaned it. And just like that, Sophia's empire crumbled. Sophia moved faster than I expected. Before the recording could play for more than a few seconds, she lunged forward, clawing at my phone with a wild desperation I had never seen before. I stepped back, but she was feral now, her nails raking across my wrist, nearly knocking the phone out of my hand. A few guests shrieked. Someone's wine glass hit the floor and shattered. But I didn't let go. I gripped the phone tighter and turned the volume up. Sophia's voice, so undeniably her own, filled every inch of the party. The soft giggle, the breathy moan, the name. Oh God, yes, James. And then, chaos. Emily gasped so loudly it was almost theatrical. One of Sophia's coworkers actually covered her mouth with her hand. A few of the other women, her so-called best friends, looked at each other like they suddenly realized they'd been sitting at the table of a plague victim. Sophia screamed. Screamed. A raw, animalistic sound that shattered whatever composure she had left. You sick freak, she shrieked, voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger at me. You recorded me? I tilted my head, enjoying the panic in her eyes. Oh no, sweetheart. I smiled. Your boyfriend did. Her breath hitched. Dead. Silence. I turned my gaze to the crowd. James. I watched them. Waited. I wanted to see it. That moment when there, a single man, standing near the buffet, stiff as a corpse, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I looked him dead in the eye. Didn't think she'd send it to me by accident. Huh, James. The room exploded. Shouts. Laughter. Gasps. A few of the guys in the back actually cheered like they were at a wrestling match. Sophia spun so fast, it was a miracle she didn't snap her own neck. Her eyes locked onto James. Wild. Desperate. Pleading. Baby, she gasped, voice trembling. He's lying. He's trying to. But James? He was already running. Straight for the door. Sophia's face collapsed. James. She shrieked, bolting after him, nearly tripping over her own heels in her hysteria. And just like that, my wife, or rather, my ex-wife, disappeared out the door, chasing the only man who was more of a coward than she was. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, let the noise wash over me, then turned to Emily, the woman who had spent years covering for Sophia, defending her, helping her lie. You knew, didn't you? I asked, my voice casual. Emily, still standing frozen by the cake, said absolutely nothing. But she didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. Emily looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her lips parted slightly, her hands trembling at her sides. The room was still buzzing, but in our little corner of it, there was nothing but pressure. Heavy, suffocating, undeniable. I took a step closer, watching her reaction like a hunter sizing up wounded prey. You knew? It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no words came out. I tilted my head. How long? Emily swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around, like she was looking for an escape. There wasn't one. I took another slow sip of my whiskey, giving her time, giving her rope. And then, finally, she broke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years. My grip on the glass tightened. 3 years. The weight of that number crashed into me like a freight train. Sophia hadn't just been cheating on me for a few months. She hadn't had a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. This had been an entire second life. Emily saw the realization hit me, and for a brief second, she actually had the audacity to look guilty. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Wow. And here I was thinking you were just a terrible friend. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Turns out you're a terrible person, too. Her eyes flashed. Maybe she had expected me to scream. Maybe she had expected me to break down. But what she wasn't expecting was this. The calm, the sharp, cutting precision of my words. Don't you dare act like I wanted this to happen. She snapped, finally finding her voice. You think I enjoyed lying to you? You think I wanted to be in the middle of this? I didn't even blink. You weren't in the middle of it, Emily. I leaned in, just close enough to watch her squirm. You were right there with her. Her face twisted. She's my best friend. No, I shook my head. She's a sinking ship. And you just went down with her. Her nostrils flared. For a moment, I thought she might slap me the way Sophia had tried to. But she didn't. She just turned sharply on her heel and stormed off, pushing past stunned guests, her hands shaking as she yanked her purse off the table. One by one, Sophia's friends, her allies, her protectors, her little army of enablers, started slipping out the door, following Emily like rats abandoning a burning building. The party, the celebration of my marriage, was officially over. And I had never felt more alive. The house was eerily quiet when I got home. No more murmurs of admiration for Sophia. No more fake laughter. No more people pretending we were the perfect couple. Just silence. And then, the sound of something shattering upstairs. I smiled. She was here. Sophia must have beaten me home, probably after failing to track down James. That coward had probably turned off his phone and gone into hiding, leaving her exactly where she belonged. Alone. I took my time. I walked through the house slowly, taking in every little detail that used to belong to us, but now belonged only to me. The framed wedding photos on the walls. The expensive vases she had insisted on buying. The couch where she had probably sat, texting him, while I was out working late to give her this life. Another crash from upstairs. Louder this time. I climbed the stairs, one by one, savoring every step. By the time I reached our bedroom door, I was practically grinning. I pushed it open. Sophia was standing in the middle of the room, destroying everything. The drawers were ripped open, clothes thrown everywhere. One of the mirrors was shattered, the shards glinting like knives on the floor. My cologne, the one she used to say smelled like home, was splattered across the carpet, the glass bottle in pieces next to it. And Sophia? She was seething. Her red dress was wrinkled. Her hair a mess. Her mascara smudged beneath her furious, wild eyes. She turned to me, chest rising and falling rapidly, like an animal trapped in a cage. You ruined everything, she spat, voice shaking. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. No, sweetheart. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You did. Her lip trembled, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage. You think you're clever? She hissed. You think you're the good guy in all of this? You think people are going to feel sorry for you? I shrugged. Doesn't matter. I feel great. She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Of course you do. You don't care about the marriage. You just care about winning. I arched a brow. You're mad that I played the game better than you? She lunged for the nightstand, grabbed the first thing she could, a framed photo of us, and hurled it straight at my head. I ducked. It crashed against the wall behind me, glass raining down onto the floor. Sophia let out a ragged breath, then collapsed onto the bed, face in her hands. For the first time that night, I saw it. Not just anger. Not just fury. Panic. The reality was sinking in. The weight of what she had lost was finally crushing her. I walked toward her, slow and deliberate, stopping just in front of where she sat. You know what's funny? I said, voice calm, controlled. I was going to wait until next week to serve you the divorce papers. She looked up sharply, her bloodshot eyes narrowing. What? I smiled. Yeah, but after tonight. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the envelope I had been waiting to give her. I let it fall onto the bed beside her. I figured, why wait? Sophia stared at it. then at me, then back at it. Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. She opened it, scanning the words, her breath hitching. This isn't. Her voice cracked. This isn't fair. I leaned in, just close enough to whisper. Neither was cheating on me for 3 years. I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard her sob. Sophia's sobs followed me down the hallway. A sound I once might have rushed to comfort. But now it was just noise. A fitting soundtrack to the end of this miserable joke of a marriage. I made my way downstairs, pouring myself another drink as I let the events of the night settle in. I had imagined this moment so many times. How I would expose her. How she would react. How I would walk away with my dignity intact while hers crumbled to dust. But nothing in my fantasies had been this satisfying. And yet, as I took a sip of my whiskey, something nagged at me. Sophia wasn't the type to lose. Not like this. Not completely. She had to have a backup plan. And that's when I heard it. The front door unlocking. I turned, placing my glass down slowly, my muscles already tensing. The door swung open, and there he was. James. Still wearing the same dress shirt from the party. But now it was wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale. He looked like a man who had run here. I almost laughed. Bold of you? I said, tilting my head. Coming here after running out on her like that. He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted around, scanning the house like he expected to see Sophia in pieces. Then, finally, he swallowed hard and said, I need to talk to you. That was unexpected. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Oh, you didn't seem too eager to talk at the party. James exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. I didn't. He paused, shaking his head. I didn't know she sent you that recording. I scoffed. Yeah? What did you think she was going to do with it? Frame it? Hang it in our living room? James's jaw tightened, but he didn't bite back, which meant he wasn't here to argue. He was nervous, and that made me curious. I studied him for a moment, then grabbed my drink and walked past him toward the living room. Go ahead, then. Talk. He hesitated, then followed, shutting the door behind him. The tension between us was razor sharp. Once, a long time ago, James had been my friend. Before Sophia. Before she had slithered her way between us, wrapping herself around him, using him as a pawn in whatever sick game she was playing. And now? Now he stood in my house, eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret or fear. I sat down on the couch, stretching out like I had all the time in the world. Well, James clenched his fists at his sides. She told me something. I arched a brow. What? Before or after she was moaning your name? He flinched. Good. He let out a shaky breath, then said the last thing I ever expected to hear. Sophia is pregnant. The room spun. For a moment, everything stopped. My breath. My thoughts. The entire world. Then, slowly, I placed my drink down, locking eyes with him. And I smiled. Because I already knew. And James had no idea what was coming next. James expected a reaction. A big one. Screaming. Throwing punches. Maybe even launching my whiskey glass at his head. But I just smiled. It wasn't the reaction he wanted. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, shifting uncomfortably where he stood. Did you hear what I just said? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Yeah, I heard you. My voice was calm. Too calm. James's brows knit together, confusion flickering across his face. He was waiting for me to break. To lose my mind over the fact that my cheating wife was now carrying a child that wasn't mine. Poor idiot. I had already won this game. I sat back, tilting my head slightly. So, are you here to tell me you're stepping up? That you're going to be the daddy now? I let out a low chuckle. Because, buddy, I promise you, Sophia doesn't need a father for that kid. She needs a scapegoat. James's face darkened. What the hell are you talking about? I stood up, slow and deliberate, closing the space between us. I'm talking about the fact that Sophia knew exactly what she was doing when she got pregnant. I circled him, watching the way his shoulders tensed. You really think you're the only one? He froze. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. I saw it the second the thought wormed its way into his head. Doubt. James turned sharply to face me, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. I laughed, shaking my head. Tell me something, James. When, exactly, did she tell you about the baby? He blinked. Tonight. Right before the party. I grinned. Yeah? And what exactly did she say? James hesitated. I took another step closer. Let me guess. She looked at you with those big, teary eyes. Told you she had something important to tell you. that she was scared, that she didn't know what to do. I smirked. Then she dropped the bomb right before you walked into that party. Because she needed you rattled. Because she needed you distracted. Because she knew what I was about to do. James's breath was coming faster now. He was catching up, his mind racing through every lie Sophia had ever told him. He shook his head again, more desperate this time. No, no, she said she was going to tell you soon. She just needed to. To what? I cut him off. Figure out which one of us was the father? The words hit him like a truck. And I saw it. The moment he realized Sophia had played him, too. James stumbled back a step, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus Christ, he muttered. I just smiled. Took you long enough. He looked up at me, eyes wild. She wouldn't. I tilted my head. You sure about that? James didn't answer, because he wasn't sure at all. I walked past him, grabbing my drink again, taking a slow sip as I let the reality sink its claws into him. So, I said casually, what's the plan, champ? You gonna raise another man's kid? Or you gonna get a paternity test and hope for the best? James didn't move, didn't speak, because there was no winning for him. Sophia had used him, just like she had used me. And now, he was stuck in the same hell I had just escaped from. James stood there, completely frozen. His entire world had just been flipped upside down, and I could see the cracks forming in real time. His breathing was uneven, his fists clenching and unclenching like his body didn't know whether to fight, run, or collapse. I let the silence stretch, let him drown in it. Because the thing about men like James, the ones who think they're the exception, the special one, they don't break all at once. They unravel. And right now, he was unraveling. Finally, his voice came out, hoarse and shaking. She told me. She said she hadn't been with anyone else. I smiled. Yeah. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. And you believed her? James flinched like I had slapped him. Because of course he had. He needed to. Just like I had once upon a time. She said you two hadn't been together in months. He tried, his voice laced with desperation. That you were distant. That she was lonely. I let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh man. I shook my head. You really bought into the victim act, huh? James's eyes darted toward the staircase. I knew what he was thinking. He wanted to storm up there. Wanted to demand answers. To scream at her. To get the truth straight from Sophia's mouth. But he didn't move. Because deep down, he already knew the truth. And I wasn't done yet. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Let me guess. She told you she loved you, right? I tilted my head, watching his throat bob as he swallowed hard. Told you I was the bad guy. That I was cold. Controlling. That she was trapped in a miserable marriage with a husband who didn't see her. James squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. I chuckled darkly. Yeah, she used to tell me the same thing. His breath hitched. I let the words sink in. Let them eat away at him the way they had eaten away at me when I first realized who Sophia really was. She's a parasite, James. I said, my voice like steel. She finds a host, drains them dry, then moves on to the next one. And you? You were just the next fool in line. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, I saw something break in them. Good. Because now, he was exactly where I had been 6 months ago. And that meant it was time for the final blow. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the thick stack of legal papers I had prepared weeks ago, and turned back to him. You want proof? I held up the documents. Here's a copy of our prenup. James blinked, caught off guard. What? I smirked. Sophia doesn't get a single dime from me. No alimony. No assets. Nothing. I flipped to the section I had highlighted in bright red and held it out for him to read. But you know what happens if she has a kid? Everything changes. James's face drained of color. I nodded slowly, watching the realization crush him. She needed an out. I said softly. And you? You were her golden ticket. James's hands were shaking. He reached up, pressing his fingers against his temple like he was trying to physically push the thoughts out of his head. But it was too late. The damage was done. He knew now. He had been played. And there was no escaping it. I took another sip of my drink, savoring the moment. Then, I leaned in close and whispered, Welcome to hell, buddy. James collapsed onto the couch like his legs had given out. He buried his face in his hands, fingers digging into his scalp as if he could somehow rip the truth out of his skull. I let him sit there, let him wallow in it. Because I had been there once. That exact moment when the lies, the manipulations, the entire twisted reality Sophia had built around me shattered, leaving nothing but cold, raw truth behind. And now, it was his turn to suffer. She, James's voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat before trying again. She told me she loved me. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. Yeah, and she told me I was the love of her life. I tilted my glass in his direction. See how that worked out? He lifted his head, eyes wild, full of anger. But not at me. Not anymore. Her. I gave up everything for her. He whispered, his voice hollow. My job. My girlfriend. My friends. His hands clenched into fists. And she, his face twisted with disgust. She was just using me. Yep. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Jesus Christ. I studied him. Watched the way his entire body trembled. Not from fear, but from rage. It wasn't enough yet. He wasn't done breaking. Not yet. I sat across from him, setting my drink down with a quiet clink. Tell me something, James. I said, my voice soft. Dangerous. When did she stop letting you stay the night? James's breath hitched. Bingo. I smiled. Yeah, that's what I thought. His face paled. How? How did you? I leaned back, stretching my arms across the couch. Because she did the exact same thing to me. I tapped my fingers against my knee. At first, it was just excuses. Right? I have an early morning. Or I need space. Or I don't sleep well next to someone. I tilted my head. And then, eventually, she started making sure you were gone before sunrise. Didn't she? James just stared at me, silent. Because he knew I was right. Because Sophia had been planning her exit for months. And he had never even seen it coming. I stood up, walking toward the door, grabbing my jacket as I went. You know what the worst part is? I turned back to face him. She's probably already got another guy lined up. James flinched. And there it was. The final nail in the coffin. I gave him a slow, knowing smile. Take care, buddy. Then, I opened the door, letting the cold night air wash over me. And I left him there. Alone. Just like she had planned all along that I didn't look back as I stepped out into the night. Didn't wait for James to chase after me. To beg for more answers. To try and salvage whatever scraps of his pride Sophia hadn't already burned to ash. Because there was nothing left to say. He was exactly where I had been 6 months ago. Standing in the wreckage of a life that was never real to begin with. The cold air felt sharp against my skin. Crisp and clean. Like the first deep breath after escaping a room thick with smoke. I walked to my car, taking my time, savoring the moment. Then, just as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Sophia. I almost laughed. Of course she would call. She had just lost everything. Her marriage, her reputation, her backup plan, her control. And now she was scrambling. I let the phone ring and ring and ring. Then at the last second right before it could go to voicemail, I didn't say anything didn't need to. The silence stretched for a long, long moment. Then her voice shaky, breathless, filled with something that almost sounded like fear. You ruined my life, I smiled. No, sweetheart. My voice was calm, steady, final. I just looked it back, and then before she could say another word, before she could try to manipulate, to plead, to twist one last time, I hung up and I never looked back. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.